Emily, have you started recording?
I have started recording, Councillor Holly, yes.
Okay. First up in the agenda is, when I find the agenda again, are there any apologies for absence?
We have just received apologies from Councillor Bridget Rowlands.
Okay. Okay, then, Emily, I'm having trouble getting the agenda up. I don't know where on earth it's going to.
No problem, Councillor Holly. Do you want me to call out the item?
Yeah. Yes, if you don't mind.
Okay. Item number 2, disclosure of personal and prejudicial interests.
Okay.
Okay. Item number 3, prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips.
I think that goes without saying these days.
Okay. And item 4, minutes of previous meeting.
Having read them, I can see there's any problems with them. Anybody got any problems with the minutes?
Yes, I was actually present at this meeting, even though I'm not on the list of those present. I've just checked by getting the video up and see myself sitting there on the meeting, so just to make sure, because I was a bit concerned.
It wasn't a cardboard cutout from one of your boxes there?
Well, it could have been a cardboard cutout, yes, but you know, it did move, so it must have been me.
Thank you, Councillor Black. I'll check that and amend that for you.
Thank you.
Okay, right. Emily, the next part, next issue is the quarter one, is it not?
Yes, that's right. And also we have no public questions today, Chair.
Okay, right. Shall we first of all go on to Mr. Ben Smith?
Thank you, Chair. I probably can't match the jollity that we've had so far because it's back to boring numbers from me. But in terms of cantering through the report, in terms of officer advice, I'll repeat some of what I gave to Cabinet. The overall advice is that it's a positive first quarter position in what remains very uncertain times. In terms of the report itself, as I advised Cabinet, the third recommendation is especially clunky this time round as taken to Cabinet. And that's because I'm encouraging directors to not spend money, to save some sweetie jar money up for later in the year and for next year, but recognising that it's very disrupted by COVID still and COVID uncertainty. And that becomes clear when I draw your attention to section 2.3, which in the report makes clear that we've got about £20 million worth of disturbance in the budgets. I mean, all of last year, you heard me talk about flex of a couple of £100 million. The good news is you're going to have nowhere near the degree of flex you had and disruption you had last year based on where we are so far. Hope that's not famous last words. And you can see there in those columns quite clearly that if it weren't for the COVID disruption and COVID variation, services would be just about balanced at the end of the first quarter, which is pretty impressive. Section 2.7 summarises in exactly the same way the approach I took last year, which set out the competitive bid process we're engaging with Welsh Government. And I repeat what I said at Cabinet, it's not a criticism of Welsh Government. I'm essentially very grateful for any monies we get back, but they're not certain, unlike grant offers in year. It's a competitive bid process and we get what we get several months after the event. So I'm afraid you are going to get reports from me in the year that says we'll have to wait and see what pans out. Section 2.9 does point out that I have a range of centrally held inflation pressures, which I can use in the very short term to ameliorate some of those service overspending. But I'm sure, as you're all aware, and we may come on to discuss and debate in due course here, inflation is a bit all over the shop and the outlook is uncertain, to say the least. So whilst it provides some short-term relief, I think there are concerns longer term for the general population, the economy as a whole, and authorities in particular. Section 3 and 3.2 in particular sets out my proposed advice, as I've already gone to Cabinet last week, in terms of use of the contingency fund, and that's part of the reason why I'm able to present a positive position overall. The strength in year is partly bolstered by last year's strength outturn. I took the opportunity to top the balance sheet contingency up to 10 million, and we did set the budget for this year with contingency. And you'll see some odds and ends of proposed draws from contingency, which Cabinet agreed, but the vast majority of it's there to offset that service overspending, which at the moment is caused by those COVID disruptors. Section 4 pulls it all together, and the table just after section 4.1 in terms of summary pulls together the service overspends, shortfall is still expected on council tax, the central offsetting assumptions and pots of money I'm able to use to indicate that there is a net underspend forecast just for the first quarter, which I'm pretty relaxed about. Section 5 in normal format draws attention to the capital budget. It's at the moment another year where it's a forecast capital budget of over £200 million. That'd be 2 years on the trot. As is normal at this time of year, the spend is relatively low. We're going to see some interesting dynamics, I think, in the year with spend, because there may be COVID disruption in terms of supplies, which limits our ability to spend as much as we would like. But there are also significant price rises that all of you will have not failed to notice, both in the shops and also as you've read the press around those price pressures that are coming. Section 6 touches upon the housing revenue account, and that's got similar issues. It's ring fenced in terms of its housing rent income, and it's got similar issues in terms of potential risks around rent arrears, and also a very large capital programme which is propped up by substantial contributions from revenue. And if those supply shortages and price issues abound, it will be the same problem for the HRA as the general fund. Appendix A is the one that pulls it all together and demonstrates on a single page that we are technically balanced for the year already at first quarter, albeit heavily relying on draws from the balance sheet contingency and hoping that we'll get some more money back from Welsh Government in year. I think that's about it in a nutshell. I don't propose to go into the director's comments on the individual pages, but it gives you a flavour of it. And I go back to what I said at the beginning, which is echoing the advice I gave to Cabinet. We are in some funny old times yet again, with pay prices and supply side issues all over the shop. Short term, with the bolstered balance sheet at outturn last year, we're in a very strong position. Longer term, we'll have to wait and see how it pans out. That's all I would need to give you in terms of officer advice. Emily, it looks like Councillor Holly has had to leave the meeting. He may have connection issues. I would normally hand over to the chair, but I'll hand back to you in the first instance until Councillor Holly returns.
Thank you, Ben. Do you think perhaps we could maybe move to members' questions in the absence of Councillor Holly?
Yes. Yeah.
Or would there be a vice chair that would normally step in at this point?
Yeah, I'd rather wait for Chris to come back, or give him a minute or two anyway, you know.
Okay.
I think it's quite important.
Councillors, I have requested that the chair rejoin us, but as Ben says, he may have some connection issues here.
Yeah, Mary seems to have the same problem, actually.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry it went off all of a sudden.
Chair, we guessed as much, and I had concluded my officer advice, and we were pausing for you to return. We'd guessed you had some connection issues.
Yeah, it's just completely gone off, so I'm not sure. I've gone back on my phone now. I do apologise to everyone. Okay, are there any questions from members? Jeff Jones.
Yeah, I can see, you know, we seem to have this ongoing problem with council tax. We've got a 2 million shortfall already. You know, we had a 2.5 million shortfall last year, which thankfully the Welsh Government met, and so on. You know, is this an ongoing problem that perhaps is going to increase this year? And is there any likelihood that again the Welsh Government will actually meet that shortfall?
So it certainly looks, Councillor, like there is an ongoing issue in the current year. People's financial circumstances are strained. That is my current forecast. I'm not the only authority drawing Welsh Government officials' attention to that. The advice we've had is Ministers and officials continue to monitor the situation and will consider in due course whether there is any funding to be made available. As you rightly say, last year we were effectively recompensed in full for the shortfall in council tax. There is no current offer for that, and I think that demonstrates that issue I was giving in terms of my officer advice. Unlike grants offered in year, where at the very beginning of the year I can give you some officer certainty for the year, these are items that will be considered in due course. I suspect we won't know until the third quarter, because the second quarter will be gone before the Chancellor's announced the National Comprehensive Spending Review and ongoing stuff and more. So that affects future years. I think Welsh Government officials and ministers will decide in due course. Longer term, of course, if that position does persist, which is perfectly possible, especially as the full effects of furlough start to fully unwind, then I will be obliged to give officer advice to council when it comes to setting the budget for next year over the assumed level of collection of council tax. When you are sitting in council, that's a difficult one for me to weigh the officer advice and for you to ultimately make decisions, because if it's not being collected for a raft of reasons and I have to assume a lower collection rate, that unfortunately loads it on everyone else. But equally, I'm duty bound to give you officer advice as to what I think is a reasonable and realistic level of collection. And if these sorts of levels persist, I will be giving officer advice that says I would have to assume a lower level of collection. But it's going to be one of those things we're just going to have to wait and see. But at the moment, there's no offer, Councillor Jones. But equally, officials haven't ruled it out. That's the best I can do at the moment, I'm afraid, in terms of advice. Just does emphasise how uncertain it is for the year.
Okay.
Sorry, Chris. I can see Paxton is waiting to ask, and so can I just go on to another question? What do you call it? Which is, shall we say, related? You said the forecast overspend is 21 million, which is again totally COVID related. So that overspend on council tax, is that part of the 21 million, and we've not had any confirmation at all with regards to the Welsh Government on meeting that shortfall as well, the 21 million COVID related?
So again, the £2 million for council tax is entirely separate and in addition to the £21 million. Welsh Government officials and ministers have made clear there are some funds available for us to claim in the year. As an accountant, I'm obliged to be prudent, some would say pessimistic, and I can only guarantee and count for income that I'm likely to get. So if I'd had a grant offer at the beginning of the year, I would be assuming our fair share of those grant offers. Because we have to bid several months in arrears until I get the money, I can't assume I'm getting it. But by way of example, at the point of writing this, yeah, we had no guarantees of getting any of that £21 million back, albeit there were several pots to bid for. Just last week, there was the announcement of the £48 million worth of new social care support, of which 40 million flows to local authorities. And I would expect, for example, to get about £3.5 million worth of that, which will immediately alleviate some of the reported pressures in social services. The problem is we don't know what new problems are going to come in the rest of the year, as the social care sector looks incredibly fragile, and it will equally depend entirely on how COVID pans out for the rest of the year. So it is that uncertainty. The only comfort I can take, it's at the moment a factor of 1/10 of the level of disruption we had last year at the present time, Councillor Jones.
Okay, can we move on to Paxton?
Thank you, Chairman. Really, in terms of table, I know last year we were not able to get the same amount of non-domestic rates as we had budgeted for. Are we anticipating that we will have the full budgeted amount this year, or is that going to?
So again,
which hopefully they will cover.
So last year, as you'll be aware, Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams, there was a combination of business grant support and also very substantial additional reliefs. Those reliefs have predominantly continued into the current year, so there will be substantial shortfalls in non-domestic rate receipts. But because it's in that component, which is the assumed amount coming from the pool, effectively the pool compensates us for that one. So I do not anticipate any material impact on the authority as a whole. I expect overall receipts collected to have gone down materially, but Welsh Government will adjust for that. The big problem, of course, which faces not only Wales but also England, is that pool has eventually and over the long term got to balance, and at the moment it is very significantly in shortfall as a result of those granted reliefs, and there will have to be a reckoning at some point, because 100% of that national pool gets redistributed back to local authorities. But that's a policy debate for another day, which will affect both England and Wales. And equally, the Welsh Government has indicated it wishes to look at both council tax and non-domestic rate reform, and the UK Government has said the same. So there's probably several years worth of uncertainty to come. But unlike last year, I expect to be fully recompensed within the pool for the shortfall. But longer term, I am concerned, and I think that's the reason you probably suspect you're asking that question, Councillor, because you're well aware of how the pool operates in terms of those longer term obligations, where we're the only recipient of the money back in local government from that national pool.
Interesting times ahead, I think, Ben, is what you're saying.
Sorry, Paxton?
Sorry, I said I think we've got interesting times ahead, is what it amounts to.
That's to say it bluntly. Any other members got any questions? Councillor Jones, Jeff Jones. Jeff.
My apologies. Yeah, Ben, you actually mentioned earlier when you started speaking, really, that shall we say the directors have been told to hold a tight grip on, you know, spending and so on. Which is perhaps unfortunate, especially for councillors, because people are always chasing us for things, and perhaps we're not being able to get what we want and so on. I've lost my drift now. I'll have to come back. I've lost my drift. I'll come back a second now.
Okay. Anyone else got any questions? No?
Sorry, Chris, I just remembered. But you actually said when you spoke, Ben, that perhaps, you know, we're holding the tight reins now for some sweeties later on in the year. What exactly did you mean by that?
I meant in terms of retaining my central cookie jars, because, Councillor Jones, the issue at the moment is if directorates overspend by £21 million, I can only balance the budget by taking £13 million out of balance sheet and in-year contingency, and a whole raft of other items, including central inflation provision. I mean, I do feel a bit of a meanie having to put a recommendation in, which I did to Cabinet, asking directors to hold the line, given the overspend is only as a result of really the COVID disruption. But it's really in the sense of that I wasn't alluding that there were extra sweeties coming from anyone. It was more that at the moment I can only balance it by using up several of those cookie jars that I often refer to, which are the earmarked reserves. I mean, you're aware in council in terms of the recovery fund, and that's different. There's been a commitment to spend that. That's fine, but it's the way I've had to balance it technically overall, which at the moment would spend not only all of the in-year contingency at first quarter, but the whole of the balance sheet contingency. And the distinction is that one, the second one is one-off, and once it's been spent, I can't replenish it. So it was in that sense that I was being especially mean on my director colleagues, asking them to try and rein it in, simply that anything they don't spend helps alleviate pressures later on, because as I've said, I think short term we've got plenty of firepower, boosted by 2 years of significant underspending and 2 years of adding significantly to reserves, but they'll only last so long. And I think, as Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams summed up, indeed the longer term outlook is interesting, would certainly be the politically astute word I would choose. That way it's neutral, but interesting is definitely the operative word of the day.
Yeah, sorry, Chris, if I can just ask another one and so on. Yeah, I was going to ask about the, I'm a bit worried about the longer term outlook as well. But on Appendix A, with the always looking at the capital financing charges, the projected seems to be higher than last year. Why are they actually higher? Is it because we're actually going to borrow more this year, or what?
In a nutshell, yes. I mean, you're aware there's an escalator, and I've got a long-term plan in terms of externalizing borrowing. In April, I borrowed another 40, I've done 90 of the original 180 million. I borrowed another 45 million pounds in April and another 30 million pounds in May, all from the PWLB, all within the permitted tolerances that are delegated to me from council under the Treasury policy statement. But if I go out and borrow another 70, 80, 90 million pounds, that comes with principal repayments and interest to boot. And that's the reason why I'm anticipating it will continue to tick up. And I've still got that longer term game, and we've debated it previously in council as to when it will peak. And as I said, originally it was 25, 26. I hope with the City deal refinancing, it'll be more like 28, 29. So although this is about the immediate first quarter short term only, it's inevitable we rightly get into those longer term pressures. And there's only so much I can speculate on that in what's a first quarter monitoring report to Cabinet, but it is right and reasonable that we all pause and reflect and accept there are difficult and interesting times ahead.
Okay. Paxton?
Just coming back quickly, if I may, on that area, Chris. Obviously, in terms of capital financing charges, you're showing that we're going to be underspent, I suppose, in that respect, in terms of about 5,000. You've been doing this successfully now for a couple of years, Ben. When is that going to come to an end, when you're not going to be able to do that in the future?
If I take you back to my last answer, effectively, I'd originally assumed it would be about 25, 26. I think I will be able to continue doing that till about 28, 29. As we've debated an awful lot in the council chamber, you're all aware it's only temporary arrangements, and I've yet to do all of that external borrowing. So my expectation, Councillor Paxton Williams, is that I can continue to have some element of underspending and some bolstering of the capital equalisation reserve and some smoothing effect that will get me through to now 28, 29. But the important thing in terms of the officer advice I've given to council in terms of the MTFP and the bits beyond the MTFP are those commitments to very substantial capital programmes and the very substantial borrowing that goes with it. So at the moment, my best endeavours are 28, 29 is as long as I can continue to have some financial alchemy, as Councillor Holly would say in council, where I can apply the Hogwarts touch to elements of it with the dark arts.
Thank you very much.
Okay, anyone else? I think, Ben, we need to have an explanation for the public, and that is that we had a £50 million surplus last year, and we are now predicting a £20 million at the moment deficit, no budget. And I think it's only right and proper that we explain to the public why we had this money at the end of the year, and now we are predicting at the end of the first quarter we have this particular potentially overspent. And I think that's important. And I think the other thing we need to understand, and I think the public need to understand, is the capital finance charges that the underspend that we've used since 2017 to put into our capital equalisation fund. Prior to that, went back into the revenue account to help the revenue account. So I think those two explanations we need to be given to the public, because I think it's important that they need to understand why we had a huge surplus one year, and we predict in the following year we have this particular overspend. Sorry.
I think you're right, and that will come in due course as part of the explanation, because it will become clear that Swansea was not alone in this. When so a number of the financial resilience assessments have been done by Audit Wales, and they will in due course produce one for local authorities in Wales as a whole. And I think you'll see substantially different performances by each of the 22 authorities, but you will also see some very significant common themes. So of that 50 million, you'll be aware that schools reserves trebled. Most authorities have reported very similar arrangements, and so it was effectively money parked at the end of the year, expected to be spent in the following year. For ourselves, 20 million of the 50 million pounds was declared almost immediately as a dividend, effectively in terms of spending on the recovery fund. Some of the other items were set aside into bolstering the capital, the contingency fund on balance sheet, and also setting aside money for schools ICT in about 10 years' time. But I think you are right. It's going to be difficult for the public to understand how you can have such a big surplus in one sense and what happens then the following year. Technically, of course, there is no overspend. It's services that are overspent by 20, and I'm using all sorts of pots of money to get it back to balance. So I would say it was 2 years of significant underspend and a current balanced position rather than a sudden overspend. But I think the point you're otherwise making, Councillor Holly, is a correct one, and I think that will come in due course when we have the midterm update on the budget in November, once we've got some feel of what's in the comprehensive spending review towards the end of October and what's in the budget and what the outlook is later on for authorities. But I think also you will see, and it probably be appropriate to give it at the time when the narrative is there for how all 22 authorities are done. At the moment, the media haven't been able to pick up on that because there isn't an overall position. But I watch closely what each authority is doing, and there are 2 other authorities that I'm aware of are in similar territory to us in terms of the sheer scale of last year's, and almost all, if not all reported significant sums of additional support last year, with an expectation that quite a lot of it's going to be spent. I think you're right, we're going to have to explain that collectively as local government as a whole to the populace, but I don't think we'll be as extreme or odd as maybe considered in isolation when Audit Wales do their national report. Councillor Holly.
I understand that, and I understand what you're saying about the other authorities, and I can well believe that the bigger authorities, ourselves, Cardiff, RCT, and Newport possibly do have these huge surpluses because of various issues. So I can't quite understand that, and the audit report on that. But I think the other question then is about that we've been putting the underspend of our capital spend back into this reserve, which in past, previous to 2017, we've used in the revenue account. That's gone back into the revenue account. We've now put that into the capital equalisation fund, and I think we need to explain that as well, because we can't have a tight rein on services, and then it's like in your own household. If you need to have the boiler repaired, you've got to take your money out of your savings to repair it. But we aren't doing that. What we are doing is making do and patching the boiler up, and yet we're still saving money and putting money into the equalised reserve. So I think there's that explanation is going to be needed to be had over the next couple of months prior to us having a council tax debate nearer the time for setting.
I don't disagree, and I think there will be the opportunity with the review of reserves in October at council, midterm review in November, and you're right, for that wider political discussion, debate, and also officer advice before you do get into council tax setting, because I think you anticipate correctly it will be of interest to the taxpayer, albeit it also has to be couched in terms of what's unique or different for Swansea compared to everyone else. And one of the things that is particularly unique is the sheer scale of additional borrowing that the council several years ago agreed and has continued to agree and approved within the Treasury policy statement. So I am determined to continue to give officer advice to remind that whilst tempting to spend it all short term, there is a longer term obligation, but it's right that it is up for political debate in council, and the public do deserve a full and open explanation of it, and I'm sure we'll continue that as we have attempted to with several other members in the council chamber, Councillor Holly. But I think you're right, because that narrative will be important as price pressures are elsewhere in the economy, that the attention will inevitably turn to council tax pressures for all authorities and what's affordable and not affordable.
Thank you, Ben, for that. I think the other thing is I did email you to ask you what the consequences of the increase in the national insurance contribution is going to cost the city and county of Swansea, and the figure is 3.1 million. Now, in lay terms, is it possible to give members quite a briefing about why it's costing us more than it would apart from the 1.5 increase?
I think it's difficult for me to give a written short summary at the moment because, of course, none of this has yet come to pass. In effect, employers pay around 9–10% in national insurance contributions. So a headline increase of 1.25% sounds like a 1.25% increase, but it's really a 10% increase because it's 1% on a 10% tax. And the other thing is we're yet to see how we're going to be recompensed, because in that Building Back Better document, there is an explicit undertaking by UK government that there will be a Barnett consequential to the Welsh government to enable all public sector employers to be fully recompensed for 100% of the cost of that employer's national insurance contribution increase. The reason I labour that is it's interesting for me as an accountant, because this is the art of the pessimist. I know with certainty now there is a 10% increase in employers' NI. That 1.25% headline increase is a 10% increase. But at the moment, I've got no guarantee or any written sum that says beyond a sort of political commitment that money will flow down through. And you're all aware we've had many debates here as to whether you can actually track through Barnett consequentials from the UK to the Welsh Government, and then it's for the Welsh Government to decide how to allocate the money in due course. Very much the same as there is a very wide debate over how much that health and social care levy will come to social care as opposed to the NHS. So I'd prefer for now to keep it as this short verbal answer until I've got some meat on the bones, Councillor Holly, because it will come in due course when HMRC issue the tax guidance rules to employers to work it through. And I will be looking carefully for the other side of it, which is the promise that we will be all fully recompensed. The danger with promises of fully recompensed when it's big pots of money and fractional shares for everyone is it's very hard to prove you definitively are all treated equally. And the bit that's particularly vexing treasurers and a number of other commentators is the guarantees in terms of public sector employers. Many of you are aware most local authorities have quite a heavily outsourced element of social care provision, and how on earth do you guarantee that flowing through to those providers who also face that employer's NIC increase, and no certainty of a guarantee that that will be neutralised by HM Treasury. So there's plenty still to come. I suspect more will be set out in the budget and more in the tax notes that come in due course. When it is clear, I'm more than happy to give a written synopsis, but hopefully that verbal update gives you a reason for why it seems so particularly magnified in scale, and why I'm a little bit cynical, shall I say, at this juncture in time, where I've got costs certain and a promise of some money back via some circuitous route in due course.
Thank you, Ben, for that. And the final thing is, we've just seen on the news today about the massive increase in the gas prices and energy prices. I know we take out contracts, but under those contracts, they're always caveated contracts. Would it be possible that sometime, possibly by the next meeting, that we have a statement on whether or not these increases are going to affect the City and County of Swansea?
I will work with my colleague, the Director of Place, whose team do the contracts, to be able to give you that written advice as to whether there is any short, medium or long-term impact. There may not be any short-term impact. I suspect you've all worked out what the rest of the answer is going to be. There is inevitably going to be medium-term impact as wholesale prices have gone up and the market consolidates. But I will liaise with Mr. Nichols to make sure there is a written advice note on that. As you rightly allude, the wholesale and commercial market is fundamentally different from the domestic market. There aren't any price caps in place, but clearly the price rises we've seen and the market consolidation that is likely to follow is going to be hugely disruptive. And I think just another example, like we've seen already with materials prices and material supply shortages, we'll have to see whether the national experts and commentators are right as to whether they're temporary or not.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Thank you for trying to clear up those things and so that we can have some explanation when people ask us these questions. I look forward to the written reply on some of the other issues. Are there any other members who have questions? No? If that's the case, thank you very much, Ben. Thank you very much indeed. The next item on the agenda is the peer review and self-assessment. I see Councillor Andrew Stevens. Is he still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew. I don't know if you want to say anything, or and then perhaps Adam.
Councillor, it's Richard. Richard, I'll be presenting the report.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know. I thought I'd seen Adam's name down first. Okay, Richard. Do you want to go first, Richard?
Yeah, shall I take you through the report briefly?
Okay.
So the report summarises Part 6 of the new Local Government and Elections Act, in particular as it relates to the council's performance and its governance arrangements. And also I've set out within the report ways in which we're now preparing for the implementation of Part 6. Paragraph 1.1 really sums up in a nutshell what Part 6 is all about. Basically, this part of the Act re-envisages local authorities as self-improving organisations, and there are two main elements to that. The first is around self-assessment, and the second is around panel performance assessment. But what, in essence, Part 6 does is that it imposes 5 new statutory duties on the council in relation to performance. So the first of those duties is in paragraph 2.2, and it's basically to keep performance under review. So we already keep performance under review, but what this means is slightly different within this Act. So what it's asking us to do is to keep under review the extent to which we are exercising our functions and using our resources and governing ourselves effectively. So what that means is how well we deliver on our services, are we providing value for money, and are we well run as an organisation? The second duty then is one to consult on performance, and this is something that we're now going to have to do every year. What we'll be consulting on is the extent to which we're meeting those new performance requirements that I've just described, either by embedding that into existing consultations or by having an annual standalone consultation. But as a minimum, we have to consult local people, local businesses, council staff, and trade unions. We'd probably want to consult a broader range of people and organisations than that. We'd probably want to consult with our partners, not least because the self-assessment will also include a review of partnership working and collaboration, but also specific groups, children and young people, people with protected characteristics, and those people suffering from or experiencing socioeconomic disadvantage as well. So quite an extensive consultation exercise every year. And again, what we're essentially asking is, we're asking these different groups and stakeholders to give us their view in terms of the extent in which we are meeting those performance requirements set out within the Act. The third duty is perhaps one of the most substantial parts of the new regulations, which is around our duty to report on performance. So what this means under Part 6 is undertaking a detailed self-assessment each year and then accounting for that through a formal report where we set out our conclusions on the extent to which we believe that we're meeting the performance requirements, and then what we intend to do to improve on that. So the statutory guidance then, it sets out a number of sort of principles around this. So it has to be a corporate assessment, so it's not assessment of any one individual service. It has to be part of embedded within our existing arrangements. We can't have this seen as a sort of a separate and standalone activity from everything else. And even though it's inevitably about process, it should also it shouldn't ignore outcomes, and it should also focus on people's experiences as well. And it should be something that's objective, impartial, and based upon a wide range of evidence. The other element of it as well is that we have to involve officers and members at different levels within the council. And I think this is where Scrutiny's involvement is useful as well, because it does represent members from different levels within the council, and not just at the end when the report is produced. The Governance and Audit Committee also has a specific role within the process. They have to review the self-assessment report and make recommendations, which we have to consider, and then they can make recommendations to change the self-assessment report. And the fourth duty is perhaps the other substantial element of the regulations, which is one around arranging a panel assessment, which is something that we have to do every electoral term, again, on the extent to which the council is meeting the performance requirements. So this is really an external view of performance. The self-assessment report, which I just described, is an internal view. So this is about more of a sector-led view in terms of how we're actually meeting the performance requirements. It's not the job of the panel to hold the council to account, but it is the job of this panel to provide an impartial and external view on how the council is operating. In terms of the panel, I've set out the expected membership in paragraph 255. Others can be appointed, but the point is that the panel has to be peer-led, it has to be independent, it has to be impartial. The council is going to be responsible for identifying the panel assessors, for commissioning the panel, and for meeting all of the associated costs with it as well. Plus, there will be a resource requirement in terms of servicing the panel, providing it with the necessary evidence and source material that is going to need to review as part of its work, and also the panel will have to undertake a consultation exercise as well as part of its duties. And then the fifth and final report duty is one where the council has to respond to the panel performance assessment report. And what that's really about is the extent to which we accept the conclusions of the panel and the actions that we intend to take in response to that, again, in order to increase the extent to which we meet in the performance requirements. I set out the relationship with the Future Generations Act in paragraph 3. So the Future Generations Act sets the broader context in terms of how we're actually meeting our performance duties. In that sense, are we meeting our performance duties in a sustainable manner and in line with the principles set out within the Future Generations Act? Also, under the Future Generations Act, we're required to publish an annual report on our progress meeting our wellbeing objectives for the preceding financial year. So what we're likely to do is to try and merge these two reports together. The Future Generations Act annual report merged with this report on self-assessment, and then we will look to publish a single report merging these two things together around about the October time each year. In the fourth paragraph, I set out the support that might be offered by the WLGA. We're not sure at this point in time that that's going to be without charge, but we'll be looking to engage with the WLGA at the appropriate time. More than likely, it's going to be based around the support that they used to give local authorities on their peer assessment process, which we last went through in 2014. Paragraph 5 then shows that whilst Audit Wales don't have a specific duty to audit the self-assessment report, they will consider how the council is going about discharging its self-assessment duty, and what they will be looking for is assurance that we are putting the proper arrangements in place that will enable us to discharge that duty. What they will also do, however, is they may well use the self-assessment report itself as part of their other considerations and their other evidence gathering when they're looking at whether or not the council has put proper arrangements in place to achieve value for money. And then in the final paragraph, in paragraph 6, we set out how we've been preparing for the new duties. So we've established an internal steering group to oversee the process, which is chaired by Adam, and also has Councillor Andrew Stevens on it as well. We've established an approach that seeks to integrate these new self-assessment duties within the existing performance monitoring process, and also within the activity to develop the annual governance statement, because many elements of this new requirements sort of crosses over into the governance side of things, which we would address with the annual governance statement. So what we're doing is that we're seeking to build on what already exists rather than trying to create something new and standalone. And then this integrated process, we'll use that then to produce 3 distinct but related products: the annual self-assessment report, the annual governance statement, and the annual wellbeing report required under the Future Generations Act. And then in paragraph 7, I've got a timetable with the key milestones on it. I think for us, the biggest challenge would be doing this within the resources that we have and within the timescales we've got in terms of our other responsibilities. But that's just another reason why we've tried to adapt it in what we already have, rather than try to create something separate and new. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Adam or Stephen, do you want to add anything at all?
Chair, no, if I can, Richard's done an excellent job of presenting the report, and I think the key thing is that really it's about embedding this and not creating a new industry on the back of it. It is identifying what we've already got. Services are already under great pressure, as you're aware, and so anywhere that we can identify something that is already in train that we can build into this is the way we want to deliver it moving forward, and I think Richard pretty much said that as part of his presentation. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, any members got any questions? No? No? Paxton.
Sorry, Chair. Just a quick one. I think Adam just touched on it then. Obviously, this is another quite major piece of work. So what additional officer time do we think this is going to cost us in terms of going to be needed to meet the requirements of this legislation?
I think that's a very difficult one to answer, to be honest, at the moment. Where we can, because we're trying to dovetail it into existing processes, we're hoping that it'll be limited in terms of additional officer time, and really it's something that we'd have to say come the end of this process when we see how it flows as we're going through. We will have to do consultation, which is more consultation than we've done previously. So that would be. It's hard to put a figure on it, to be honest, Paxton, in terms of how we'd say exactly what that will be. But I mean, just undertaking a consultation exercise would be probably the equivalent of at least one day a month, say, of somebody's time to coordinate and bring that all together. In terms of the self-assessment and assurance and bringing the panels in, that would be considerable. I think you could easily see it'll be the equivalent of a half-time post will be what we'll try and absorb within the existing resources that we've got. We have taken on an additional members to the team and extended some of the team that were part-time into full-time to help pick some of this up. So, but I think anything from a half-time post to a full-time post will be what we would need to try and cover through this process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Mary Jones. You muted, Mary.
Mute. Oh, I wouldn't unmute. I'm having a few problems with connection as well. Paxton's actually asked part of my question, and really is probably more of a comment. It's a huge piece of work. I mean, I know about the wellbeing report because that has been there for a little while. But I mean, the local government, they're expecting us to do all this and deliver the services for our residents. I mean, the amount of work they're asking. I know you're a small team in Richard Rowland's team. When I was reading it, says it's meant to be a part like of business as usual. So what kind of training or what do you expect to do to get the rest of the heads of service or whoever it is that is going to do it on behalf of their own directorate area? Because you said it's a half a day equivalent for somebody, but really this should be coming from all the directorates. And as you said, it's more or less business as usual. When the plans are in place, it just seems to be awfully messy. You've got to have your other panel where you've got to have your presentations to CMT. But I read somewhere else that you had to have a chief executive and an independent chair. I mean, the work connected with that seems really, really high for what actually we will get out of it as local government.
Does anyone want to make a comment? Adam, Richard?
Yeah, I'll come in first, and then Richard will probably want to get into a bit more of the detail, I think. Certainly in terms of additional work, services that we're already trying to run is business as usual. We look at the training that we will do, and we'll roll it out through the leadership team. As Richard's already been there, we're going to CMT this week to update them and start that journey. But I think the other thing that you need to be mindful of is that we're still responding to COVID, and there's an amazing amount of work still happening there. Richard's team still supporting all the risk and so on. So you're quite right. Although the idea at the end of this, when we've got this in train, it will be business as usual. There will be a lot of work that Richard's team has to put in between now and then. The other bit of that is that a chief executive won't come for free to sit on the panel. So there is an additional cost that we need to cover somewhere through the budget process to make sure that all those people on the panel will have charges and expenses. We'll also have to do the same in return, potentially with other authorities. So, there's only so many chiefs to go round. So there will be a sharing of resource, and where we can, we will try and do it on a reciprocal arrangement. So we might get a chief from another authority or a deputy chief. It might be myself who goes into another authority to do that. But nonetheless, that's taking away from what we've got on a daily basis, because there's more than a full-time job for us to do now without this added in. So I think it's a fair question, Mary, and not going to be easy to juggle all of that and the extra workload that comes in. Richard will probably want to pick up a little bit more about the team and how they're going to facilitate that with the additional resources that we have been given.
Okay, Richard.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that it's going to be an evolving process. So this will be the first year that we're going to be doing this. So our approach has been to build that into what already exists rather than build something new. So that should help both my team in terms of overseeing this process, but I also think it will help the services as well, because all we're going to be doing really this first year is asking them for some additional information to what they already provide us with, rather than something that's distinct and extra and new and something that would be overburdensome. I think over time, there are things that we can do to build this approach into things. So, you know, through things like service plans, we could probably build more of a self-assessment approach into that. And there are other things as well that we can do. I think the other significant element will be the panel assessments, I think. You know, organising and arranging those and servicing those, I think, will be a challenge for us. And I think the way around that really is, you know, for my team to support each other. So, you know, not to sort of just focus on, well, that's not part of my work and that's not part of my job. So everybody pulling together as a team and then working with others. And I think we can probably manage it then. And I think we just need to see how this process goes and then seek to tweak and improve it as we go forward, learning lessons, what works and what doesn't.
Okay, I got Adam and Andrew. Andrew did have his hand up, but I think he's disappeared. So I got Peter got his hand up to ask a question. Adam, I'm going to Peter first and then back to you. Or do you want to?
I just wanted to come back, if I could, on what Richard was just saying, because there's a bit that we sort of, Richard touched on, but sort of didn't expand on, and that is that the whole point of this self-assessment is about self-improvement. And so what comes out of this, so not what goes into the process of the panel and setting everything up and what we do within our self-assessment, it's also, when we come to the end of this, it is about self-improvement. So there will be a whole program of improvement, sort of a learning organization, and there will be a cost in terms of resources and implementation at that point, and we don't know what they will be yet in terms of how do we improve. So it's a longer term ask than just meeting the need of undertaking the piece of work. It's what's going to come on the back of it, and we should see this as a positive, though, in terms of that self-improvement, because we all want to be better and do things better, be more efficient and effective in what we do, and so we want to embrace this as a way of doing that. So not see it as an added hassle, if you like, but actually see it as a way we can streamline what we do in terms of learning and get the benefit from it, and use that peer review from outside the authority to help us drive that change moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Black.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies first of all, because I got called away at the very beginning of the introduction to this report, so I may have missed something, but I'm just looking at this report. I mean, from what I can see, this self-assessment is a continuous annual process. So the timetable you set out on paragraph 7, where you basically, the next 3 months, you're going to be doing preparation work to carry out in January, and that'll take you through to October. Then you start all over again, effectively, for the following year as well. It does seem to me to be quite a bit of a treadmill, but I'm interested particularly on the consultation, the duty to consult on performance. I'm just interested, what does that actually add up to? I mean, how do people perceive our performance? If I go on the doorstep in my ward, people perceive our performance in terms of, are the dog bins being emptied, are the streets being cleaned, are the bins being collected, are the libraries open? But I mean, the performance from the point of view of how this is set out here is much more strategic than that, and a much wider approach to that. So how do you actually get that down to educate people as to what they should be looking at when they're being asked to comment on our performance?
Richard,
shall I answer that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think a lot of this will depend on the questions that we actually ask. And we will have to give some consideration to those questions because Councillor Black quite rightly said, you know, this is quite a high level and strategic set of performance requirements. So it'll be up to us really to try and make that understandable to the public and, you know, set it out in a way that, you know, makes it relevant to them. So we haven't considered the detail of that yet, but that is a major thing that we are thinking about. It is at the front of our minds and something that we will have to consider before we do that consultation. And Councillor Back is quite right. It is a cyclical process. As soon as we finish in October, then we'll be pretty much back starting again. But it's meant to be iterative. It's meant that the conclusions from the first process feed into the second, and as Adam said, it should be a continuous program of improvement going forward.
Okay, can I ask another question? Because having been a local government minister in the Welsh Assembly, I can tell you that there will be civil servants rubbing their hands in glee at this whole process, particularly the external panel assessment. And my concern is that if we carry on our continuous performance, the external panel comes along and says, well, we're not actually happy about the way this local authority is responding to the pressures which are on it. It's not performing up to the way they say they're performing, and how ministers then react to that, because it does seem to me that what we're creating here is a rod for our own backs, if you like. We're saying we're producing an assessment, an external panel is coming to look at us and giving a report which ministers will pick up on to enable them to intervene and interfere in the way we run local government, and that does give me some concern.
Okay, do anybody want to answer that, or I'll leave it as a statement? Okay.
I think Adam is staying diplomatically quiet on the question.
Yeah, I was going to, but I think it does need an answer. I think some of the points you make, Peter, are absolutely right, but I think part of it is about demonstrating. That's the reason the panel would be made up of a whole myriad of people, so that although this is new to us, England have been doing peer reviews for some time. Wales has done peer reviews. The WLGA is also in this space, looking at how it can coordinate and advise and link together. So it's more about self-assessment than imposed performance from outside. So it's us looking at ourselves with some checks and balances. And I think the key message is what Richard said, is the questions that we pose need to demonstrate the points already identified on how do we report on performance. So what are we doing? How are we doing well? What is value for money? Much of that we already do through our senior management assurance scheme and the annual governance statement that shows how well we are run. We look at checks and balances. We use WAO and other agencies to check that we are appropriate in the way we govern and deliver the services. We also have various accolades like APSI, and you'll be aware that recently we won an award in APSI for some of our innovation in housing. So we'd model all that to show what we're doing also. So I don't view this as a Welsh Government opportunity to poke us and push us into a certain direction. This is for us to identify ourselves where we can do better, where we can do more, and have that sort of triangulated by an external panel also. And that external panel will need to justify why and how we need to do better in what areas. So they can't just try and push us down one direction, because it would link to our corporate plans, it would link to our service plans, it would link to the financial accounts that we've got. So all of that would be shown also. So I think we need to currently view it as a way that we can become a true learning organisation that can better ourselves, and just look for areas that perhaps we know that we're weak on, and can look to others to advise, help and support us to improve what we're doing.
So it's an opportunity, not a threat.
I think so. That's where that's the space I'm in at the moment. And I think, you know, the proof is in the pudding as we go through. I've been through peer reviews previously in England, and that's how we viewed it, and it's worked really well in order to be that learning organisation and move forward.
Okay, Paxton.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to come back in quickly, really, in that sense. Obviously, Adam says this could be very much a positive thing as far as the council is concerned, and I wouldn't argue that. But what really concerns me is that more and more these days, Welsh Government seems to be getting involved, whether it's PSBs, whether it's CJCs, whether it's well-being reports, whether it's self-assessment. To what extent is this going to continue, and when are we going to have to be able to, when are we going to have to say as councillors, basically, stop? You know, it's taking too much resource, it's taking it away from frontline services. Unless you really give us huge support financially, we just can't afford to do it. And it's going to come to that stage, and I don't know what the answer to that is, but obviously the WLGA have got a role to play with it, and I guess the city councillors who are in the controlling group and can talk to the Welsh Government in that sense have also got a role to play. Just a point I wanted to make, and I don't know whether people would agree with the same thing, but it strikes me that what we're seeing is more and more bureaucracy being forced on us, which is taking officer time and distracting them from, or distracting the council from providing frontline services.
Okay. Anyone else got any comments? I don't know if Adam, you want to say anything about what Paxton said?
Yeah, I think it's, again, a very fair point. I think that there is a challenge for local authority that's coming. You know, you've already heard from Ben the challenges that we've got moving forward on finance. You know, as officers, we're pulled every which way. You're right in terms of increasing bureaucracy. But I think we need to channel that also through the WLGA. We need to channel it through our own professional organisations throughout the council. We're already pushing back on, you know, had a meeting last week with the Welsh Audit Office to say that a number of audits that they want to bring in, we just cannot service while we're still responding to COVID, and while we're still, you know, responding to the needs of our communities. We just don't not have that officer time. And in fairness to Audit Wales, they've listened. They have withdrawn one of their audits and moved it back. So we would hope that Welsh Government will do the same when we make the same soundings to them in terms of what we need to deliver and what's coming through. The same as when we talk to the various commissioners and we say that we're really struggling to be able to do some of the work. We've gone back just recently on the wellbeing assessment to the commissioner to say, actually, we're really going to struggle to hit the timeline because of everything else. So we're waiting for a response for that. And that will be the first real test to see if there is an understanding and a sympathy with local government that they are willing to look at slipping timelines and move things back. And it's not that these aren't important areas. The wellbeing assessment is very important, but it's only important if we can dedicate the time and the commitment to it to be able to do it properly. And by slipping it into next year rather than the early part of the year, that would give us that breathing space to be able to do a proper and thorough job rather than just doing what we need to do in order to have one. So we'll see over the coming next week or two what response comes from that, and that'll be the real test. Otherwise, you're quite right, Paxton. You know, there will need to be a more robust challenge from all our politicians on all sides of the council chamber to utilise that power in order to hopefully push back and make some choices on risk that we are willing to do and what we're not willing to do in order to move forward, because we can't take our eye off the ball in terms of the services that we provide. Certainly in terms of social services, education, certainly resources, supporting all of those, because they're our primary aim in order to safeguard our communities. That has to be what we do moving forward and maintain that rather than some of the paper chase that we have to go through.
Okay, anyone else?
Just to say thank you, Chairman, as well.
Okay, thank you. I have to say, Adam, I read through this and I've got to be perfectly honest. I think this is going backwards in many respects. I've done peer reviews, and peer reviews have been done of me, and I always remember a managing director of mine saying when there was redundancies, but there's also a challenge you could possibly raise to it, and this seems to be the same with when I looked at this. I'm not sure what the role of scrutiny will be in this. I heard what Richard said, but it seems to me that you do a self-assessment, you give it to an outside body, they say yes or no. I questioned some time ago whether or not performance was coming to this scrutiny board for members here to scrutinise it or go straight to audit. And because there was an issue about audit doing a very similar thing as we do to scrutinise the governance of the council. So effectively, what I am concerned about this. There's something here in 253, reaching a conclusion the panel must consult local people, local businesses, staff, trades unions. It doesn't say councillors. It doesn't say the people who actually stand for election for those authorities, that they shouldn't be consulted. It doesn't say that, and I feel that really is a bit of an insult to us members. And I think we really need to seriously think about when we do this. So we have to do it because it's part and parcel act. But as members who stand for election for Swansea City Council, we actually respond to what our performance is, and yet it's saying we're not even going to be consulted, and I feel that isn't in the report, and I think it needs to be in. As far as WLGA support is, I'm really concerned about that. We need to talk to Mr. Llewellyn in the WGA to find out exactly what support we're going to be having and what form it's going to take. And Audit Wales, well, again, you would ask yourself, what if they're not going to audit the process, but audit the outcome of the process, then you ask yourself, how are we going to get along with that? Okay, Paxton, you put your hand back up.
Yeah, I'll just come back in quickly again, if I may, Chairman, in terms of what you said about the Audit Committee. Obviously, the Audit Committee does a lot of work in this area, particularly in terms now of risk assessment and what we're doing there, and performance as well. Both Adam and Richard will know that full well, and there is that sort of potential for duplication if we're not very careful around that area. There's something we need to be looking at, and that's obviously something that Adam and Richard can comment on now in terms of responding to you, I think, Chris.
Okay, Adam or Richard, whichever.
Yeah, I'll take that, and then I'm sure Richard will again come in with a bit more of the detail. So you're absolutely right. We need to be very clear. We've tried hard to make sure that Scrutiny and Audit and Governance Committee have their respective roles and are very clear on what their remits are, and we'll continue to do that through this process to make sure there is a role for both, and for that to come through. Your previous sort of question and statement, Chris, in relation to councillors being consulted, remember the panel is assessing the council as a whole, not the cabinet, the performance assessment. So the duty to arrange a panel performance assessment is to assess the council is meeting its performance. So that's all the council, not just the ruling group. So and that's the nuancing. So we wouldn't consult the members on what they're doing. What there would be, obviously, in my mind, as we go through this, is the panel would meet councillors, not as a consultation, but certainly in terms of part of their understanding of why the council is doing what they're doing, because the decisions are ultimately made by council in its entirety. So that's where it talks about, and it talks about that under that 2.5, and it's the council meeting, not the cabinet, not the ruling group. So I think you're absolutely right. There has to be a role for all councillors, regardless of group in this. But the consultation is for an outward look to council on who we serve, and they are the local businesses, our own staff, and trade unions and so on, because that needs to be a distant consultation to internal. So there would be more of an interview internal but consultation external. So I think it's just down to a bit of terminology, and it's difficult, but that's certainly the way I see it and the way we'd look to bring that in. So I'm not sure if Richard wanted to clarify any other points.
Yeah, it was just really to build on that. I think that's the way that the statutory guidance sees it. When it refers to consultees, it's thinking of that sort of external view of how the council is performing. But in fairness, the guidance does make a lot of reference to making sure that councillors from all different parties and all levels are involved in the process. And I think one of the good things about Scrutiny is that it does involve councillors at all levels and across the different political groups. So I think the key challenge for us really is making sure that Scrutiny is involved in the process itself and not just at the end when the report is produced.
Then can we then put it into this report? Because at the moment, if you read through it, you know, from the statutory duties, there's nothing in there. Relationship of well-being in future, WLG support. I've gone through it, and there's no specific reference to the scrutiny function at all. So I was wondering if we could put that in.
Certainly we can, yes, definitely, Chair.
Okay.
Just to add to that, if I may, obviously, scrutiny role goes on over a 12-month period. How are you going to pull together everything that comes out of those scrutiny meetings? Or are we going to be looking for a report as we get with policy PDCs these days in terms going back to cabinet members? Or are we going to want from scrutiny performance panels or whatever reports going back in that sense?
Well, each quarter, Richard comes, like he's coming next time, with a report on the performance per quarter. All I'm saying is this self-assessment has to be part of that quarterly report. So as Adam has already pointed out, that it's going to be embedded into the structure of our council. So it's also embedded into the quarterly reports. I'm not on about bringing a single report back at some stage. It's an ongoing, as Peter has pointed out already, this is an ongoing piece of work, if you like. So that ongoing piece of work would be added to our scrutiny function, which is done every quarter.
Sorry, I wasn't arguing with that, Chris. I was just wondering how that information is going to get back to Richard and his team who are doing the self-assessments then.
Well, they'll be doing it. We'll be reporting back every quarter. Adam.
Yeah, I was just going to make that final point. To be honest, Chris, wherever we can, it is to embed it within the current governance arrangements that we have, not to generate any additional meetings, not to generate any additional work or any additional reporting. It is to keep this as simple as we can through. You know, our current governance system works and works well, so we might as well use those, and it would be reporting back. So each of the ones, Richard, myself, or whoever will report through, we take the soundings, it would report back from that scrutiny. There may be somewhere along this a task and finish kind of element to one aspect, depending on what the findings are, that might generate a stream of work, as it would now, and that might be through the PDC, or it might be through another group, or it might be through audit and governance. But it would only be where there is something that really warrants being worked on in some level of detail. But the majority of it will be through our existing governance structure and fed back in, and the learning would evolve as we go through.
Just from the point of view of scrutiny, in that sense, would it be sensible that if any letters are being sent to cabinet members, that those be copied through to Richard at the same time?
Well, it would be anyway.
Are they as of now, or are they obviously they're available to be seen, but whether they actually are looked at is another matter.
Well, I can't say that they look at them.
No, like sorry, what I'm saying, I'm not sure whether Richard or his department are specifically recipients of those reports, or whether they can see them on council website, which is slightly different.
Okay,
Chair,
I don't.
But
Chair,
I think that's for you to say what you want, really, at the end of the day.
Chair, I think that you know, Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams is making a good point in that you know, as part of the self-assessment, what we have to do is, when we're looking at our evidence, that includes the reports that are coming out of scrutiny. That's obviously a key element of our assessment as to whether or not we are meeting the performance requirements. So that's definitely in our plans to make sure that we take all scrutiny reports into that self-assessment.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Right, well, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Adam. And thank you all for your contributions there. The next item on the agenda is the work plan. And you will notice in the work plan that at the next scrutiny board meeting, we have Richard coming back with the report on performance monitoring for governance and a mid-budget statement, which is in October. And then you can see again, planning performance, etc., etc. Any comments on the work plan? No? That's it. Can I?
Chair, if I may just draw your
Sorry,
attention.
Ben.
The work plan presumed the midterm statement would come in October. The reserves items will still come, but I will need to defer it to November, given the Chancellor has confirmed the comprehensive spending review is not until the 27th of October, with your permission, assuming panel members are satisfied with that.
I think panel members would prefer that, so that they're aware of what's going on when the statement is made by the Chancellor. All agreed with that? Yep. Okay. Yep. And thank everybody for coming along and your contributions. Can I ask Emily, can you stay on for a minute, please? Thank you all.
Thank you all.